It's time now for Health Fitness Broadcast with Sherry, a show covering the hottest fitness topics and latest health issues. And now, here's your host, Sherry Horner.
Welcome to the show. Today is very special. We have a very special guest. He is a world-renowned science writer. He's written over 3,000 articles, written for about 20 international health and fitness publications over a course of 30 years. He currently writes for Ironman magazine, and he served as nutrition advisor for dozens of world-class athletes, Oscar de la Hoya being one. And I'd like to introduce our guest today, Jerry Brainum. Jerry, welcome back to the show.
Hi, nice talking to you, Sherry.
Now, we talked several years ago. What a great interview, one of my favorites. But there was another interview with yourself and Bill Grant, which is at the top of the list also of my favorites. And that actually was in 2007, the day of Mr. Olympia. So if I could take you back to that moment, the reason it was such a great interview is because you were able to call into the show from the Mr. Olympia, and the prejudging had just finished. So we were able to, you gave us the rundown on what the prejudging was like. So that was really great. Now, in your career, you were there many, many times interviewing competitors yourself, and to be able to, you mentioned to be able to be there as a spectator and just really take it all in was a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to thank you for that interview, and thank you for joining us today. I want to talk about sports nutrition, and I have a lot of questions for you. But first off the bat, I want to ask you, what do you think is the single most effective bodybuilding supplement?
That, without a doubt, would have to be creatine. Creatine works for 80% of the people that use it, and the other 20% it doesn't work as well for are basically habitual meat eaters, because meat, particularly red meat, is the highest natural source of creatine. So if you eat, let's say, hamburger or steak a couple of times a week, you're actually doing a natural, what they call creatine load, meaning that you're gradually loading creatine naturally occurring in the meat, in the muscles. So your muscles usually have a pretty good amount of creatine. So if you take a creatine supplement, you're not going to get a huge benefit. In fact, sometimes they don't get any benefit. But for everybody else, and these days a lot of people seem to kind of avoid eating a lot of red meat, the creatine is going to have a tremendous effect. It works very well, and particularly for people involved in weight training or what they call anaerobic activity. That's kind of high-intensity activity like sprinting and anything that requires a lot of effort in a short time. Creatine will be a tremendous effect for it. And like I say, I've never seen it fail to work for anybody that's used it. The only problem with creatine is some people, they sometimes take too much, and creatine's an amino acid byproduct, so it's made from 3 amino acids in the liver and the kidneys and the pancreas. So if you or if you take too much creatine at once, you tend to pull fluid into the gastrointestinal tract. This causes problems. They get like bloated feelings and that type of thing. But that's usually a rather rare occurrence. Most of the side effects that have been attributed to creatine, like muscle cramps, a couple of others, when they've been tested in rigorous studies, usually these side effects don't show up at all, or the same amount of side effects show up with a placebo that's given to some of the subjects, which means that it's probably not a real effect. So I would say creatine's right at the top of the list. The studies come out continually. As I said to a friend of mine, I could write an entire column on creatine research alone with nothing else every month and not be short of any material. That's how much creatine research continually comes out.
Wow. Now, that's good for anyone training that doesn't eat a lot of red meat. There's a lot of vegan bodybuilders, so would you suggest that for them?
Actually, creatine works even better for vegans because, again, the vegans, if they're a straight vegan, they're not eating any red meat, or even if they're, let's say, a lacto-ovo, which also avoids red meat, their bodies, your body makes 1 gram of creatine, but when those people take a creatine supplement, they get a tremendous effect. In fact, they get the best effect of all because relatively speaking, their muscles don't contain as much creatine as, let's say, a red meat eater. So when they take the supplemental creatine, it kind of tops off the muscle stores of creatine, and they get the best effects in every study have always come with vegans. And vegans don't have to worry about meat products or anything like that, even though creatine is found naturally in meat, because the creatine supplements on the market are all synthetic. They're all made through a chemical process that doesn't involve any kind of red meat extraction. So any creatine supplement is perfectly suitable for even the strictest vegan.
Mm-hmm. No animal products, so that's good.
There's no animal products whatsoever. It's totally synthetic.
So I mentioned the vegan bodybuilders, but what about the everyday fitness enthusiast, the weightlifter who's not competing? He's just working out or she's just working out to feel good and to look good, but they don't eat meat.
I understand. For them, the creatine's it's going to increase workout efficiency. They're going to be able to train harder. They're going to probably have less fatigue, and they're going to have a little bit more energy actually, in even everyday life, because creatine in the body, it's kind of serves as a backup. I always compare it to having like an extra battery in the car. It's like the backup to the most elemental form of energy, which is called adenosine triphosphate, or ATP.
Mm-hmm.
And ATP only lasts 6 seconds, and the body kind of constantly recycles it. This is any energy food you eat that contains calories, let's say protein, fats, carbohydrate, they all eventually become ATP. And creatine works by basically helping to recycle ATP in the cell. So you can see it has a very broad usage. It's even used now in neuromuscular diseases and heart problems. It's got a broad base even in medicine. So basically, anyone who's working out will derive benefit from creatine.
Mm-hmm. I use it. Go ahead.
And it works well for women and men and older people. So there's one of the controversies about creatine. A friend of mine asked me this about a year ago, is about giving creatine to, let's say, children or teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
And I always point out that there's a certain genetic disease where they gave very young children. This is way before creatine even came on the market. They were giving creatine to these kids that were about 2-3 years old for as long as 6-7 years, and there was no side effects whatsoever from the creatine. And studies with teenagers show that it's very safe. It's basically just a natural food product. I mean, to say that creatine's dangerous, you'd have to say that eating protein's dangerous because it's a protein byproduct. Mm-hmm. So basically, creatine is useful for just about anybody who's involved in exercise. I would say that.
So it really is the most effective supplement.
Oh, yeah.
I use it a little, not as much as I should, because I don't eat red meat. So you're right. That's, very effective. Let me ask you this, Jerry Brainum. Okay, so out of all the nutrients that we take in, what are 2 that are most likely lacking in most people in their diets?
I would say definitely the 2 would be vitamin D and fish oil.
Mm-hmm.
Not fish oil, let me just say omega-3 fatty acids to be specific. Vitamin D, in recent years, if you look at the medical journals, they estimate that, I think I saw a figure recently where half the world's population is actually deficient in vitamin D. And while vitamin D is usually associated with bones, calcium absorption, which is true, in recent years they've discovered that vitamin D has a multiplicity of effects in the body because they have these things called vitamin D receptors, which are on all kinds of organs and tissues all over the body. It affects all kinds of processes. For example, vitamin D is needed to activate these cells, these immune cells called T cells. And the T cells, among other functions, protect you against viruses and cancer. When your body, when the tumor crops up in your body, certain T cells sense it and actually destroy the tumor before it takes hold. So vitamin D actually activates these type of T cells. So in that respect, vitamin D can actually have an anti-cancer effect. It's also very good for your heart. And the thing is, the interesting thing about vitamin D is that it's actually a free nutrient. All you have to do is go in the sun for about 15 minutes, and I think the figure you can make as much as 10 to 20,000 units of vitamin D. The problem is twofold. First of all, the sun has to be of a certain intensity, that is the ultraviolet rays, particularly ultraviolet ray B. It has to be at a certain latitude where it hits the skin at the right angle. And then again, if you're living in areas like in the winter in northeast area, the sun isn't strong enough.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's, of course, the other aspect is that a lot of dermatologists go around telling people how dangerous the sun is, and it causes melanoma, which is a deadly form of skin cancer, and it causes premature aging. But the experts on vitamin D counter by pointing out that all you need is a very minimal exposure of about 12 to 15 minutes maximum of as much skin as you can get. In other words, like you want to wear like shorts or expose your arms, not necessarily your face, but your arms and your legs at least, to get the benefit of the sun. But most people, again, either they're in areas that don't have enough sun, ultraviolet radiation going because of the season, or they just are afraid of the effects of the sun. For those people, they should definitely take vitamin D supplements. Now, as far as the omega-3 goes, that's extremely important also, and there's been just tons of studies, you can't even keep up with it, about the health benefits of omega-3. And omega-3 is found naturally in various forms of fatty fish like mackerel, halibut, sardines, anchovies. And the thing is that if you don't eat these kind of high-fat fishes, let's say at least 3 times a week, I'd say the odds are very good that you're deficient in omega-3. It's very, very prevalent.
What are some of the symptoms how can you tell if you're deficient?
Well, one symptom that's come to light is depression, because your brain is composed of 40% of the fat in your brain is composed of one of the omega-3 fatty acids called DHA. And if you don't regularly ingest omega-3 fatty acids, your brain becomes relatively deficient. And when this happens, it affects the activity of these chemicals that transmit messages in the brain called neurotransmitters. Some of them, such as norepinephrine and dopamine and serotonin, they're the things that kind of uplift your mood and basically keep you happy. And when they get low due to a lack of, let's say, interaction with DHA, you wind up getting depressed. So that's one symptom. There's a couple of other symptoms, but that's probably the primary one. One psychiatrist I remember reading estimated that 80% of people with depression are deficient in omega-3. And if you look on the list of the best-selling drugs, you'll see that antidepressants are always in the top 5. It shows you how many people are walking around depressed.
Wow.
And I guarantee if you speak to these people, almost none of them are, let's say, heavy fish eaters or fatty fish eaters. Now, you don't have to eat fish. I personally don't like fish myself. But what I do is I take omega-3 in the form of fish oil, which is the best supplement to use for omega-3. And I actually take a lot more than they even recommend, because omega-3, one of the, again, benefits of it is that it's a tremendous natural anti-inflammatory.
Mm-hmm.
I happen to, unfortunately, suffer from 2 chronic inflammatory diseases. One of them is asthma, which I've had since I was 12. And the other one is cropped up in the last couple of years is osteoarthritis of my knees.
Mm-hmm.
And I used extra omega-3 to help kind of tone down the inflammatory fire that's associated with these diseases. So I use quite a bit of it myself. So
that is amazing. Yeah, that's amazing information, and I can attest to that too. I have the knee issue, and when it gets to it's just too much to handle, and then I look back and I've gotten out of the habit of taking my fish oil, and then get back on it. My knees are 90% better. So.
Well, I'll tell you that. I'll just add that a lot of women I've spoken to over the years, they kind of are a little hesitant to take fish oil, because a lot of them tell me they've tried it and they kind of get this thing where they burp up the fish taste, and it really annoys them.
Yeah, but that goes away. Have you heard people say that it goes away after a while? It does.
I have heard that, but there's this easy solution is to take the fish oil with meals. If you take it with meals, the upchucking, if you want to call it, of the fish oil or the fishy taste is much less likely to happen than if you take it on an empty stomach.
Good
point. So that's one solution.
Good point. So fish oils or omega-3s and vitamin D.
Those are the two, I'd say, the two most prevalent deficiencies, yeah.
Okay. I have some more questions for you, Jerry. Okay, so should we, in the food that we take in, should we get all of our protein needs through that food, or are protein supplements of any value, or is it too much?
Well, again, this is a big debate, among various dietitians and self-styled experts. They always like to say that it's ridiculous to take protein supplements because protein is so readily accessible in food. I mean, you have meat, fish, eggs, cheese, all these foods are chicken. These things basically have a lot of protein. But what they overlook, and I've written this in some of my articles now, if you look at a popular bodybuilding supplement called whey, whey is a derivative of milk. Milk protein contains two proteins. It's 80% casein and 20% whey. Now, both these milk protein fractions contain smaller proteins called peptides, and they called bioactive peptides because they have various beneficial effects in the body. For example, some of them improve digestion, some of them lower blood pressure, various effects like that, and they're always coming out with new beneficial effects related to these peptides. So, in fact, whey has something in it called cysteine residues, which have a tremendous effect of boosting immune function, so much so that forms of whey protein are used as therapy for HIV patients. So,
wow.
You look at a protein supplement like whey, and it goes beyond mere protein. You're getting a lot of health benefits from these, let's say, so-called hidden factors. I mean, there's appetite suppressants in these proteins that help you stay on a diet. And the thing is, a lot of people don't really want to chuck down a lot of protein foods, particularly those that aren't, let's say, hardcore athletes. They don't want to have to eat like 4 or 5 meals a day loaded with protein. For them, they can have their normal meals and take, let's say, a whey protein in between their meals, or let's say after a workout, and they can easily get their daily protein requirement minus a whole bunch of calories, no fat, no carbohydrate, and highly assimilable protein. So, I wouldn't discount the value of protein supplements for people, especially those engaged in either sports or exercise, because it's a supplement, basically. In other words, you don't want to live on it, but it's handy to have around. I mean, this way. I mean, I myself. I was a hardcore bodybuilder for years. I'd load up the protein. I just don't have the appetite to do that anymore. So, I take protein like 2 times a day myself. I mean, I take it between meals. My breakfast drink is basically based on just whey protein with a little bit of fruit added. That's what I have for breakfast. I mean, it's convenient for me, and this way allows me to get my protein without, again, taking in a lot of calories, which is a concern of mine these days.
Jerry, let me ask you about protein tablets. What do you think about those?
Well, protein tablets are okay, but, you have to take quite a bit of them. I mean, the protein tablets I've seen, they don't really have a lot of protein in them because they have to put fillers in there. So, if you're willing to take like 20 of them a day, they're okay.
Wow.
I know there's one company now that's come out with a protein tablet, which they claim is superior to any of the protein supplements on the market. In fact, their advertising says that most of the protein supplements and the protein foods you eat are basically not only partially used, most of it is excreted out of the body unused. They claim that their particular protein tablet actually, is used 99% utilizable. And this is probably true if it's an amino acid-based tablet. But a lot of their claims just aren't backed up by any real science, and they haven't proved the superiority of the claims, in other words. But to answer your question directly, protein tablets are fine. You just have to take a lot of them, which I find most people aren't willing to do. I mean, you can take like 1 to 2 scoops of protein powder, but, to get the same amount, you have to take like 20 of the tablets.
Wow.
A lot of people don't want to do that. I remember when I was a kid, they had, you had protein tablets were a lot more common in those days. I remember taking one that was vanilla tasting, which to me was really tasty. And I used to take about 30, 40 of them at a time. I'd eat it like candy.
Wow.
But a lot of people aren't willing to do that. They'd rather just
get
it over with.
Well,
take one or two. Go ahead.
Speaking of supplements on the market now, there are some, well, actually a lot that claim to boost testosterone levels. Do they really work?
No, that's the thing. It's an interesting concept because, you had you have to go back in time a little bit. I mean, the first so-called prohormone, which prohormone means that it's a precursor or a substance that will convert in the body into testosterone. The first actual commercial one was probably a adrenal steroid called DHEA, which is made in the body, but they make it in supplement form. The original one was extracted from Mexican yams, which also happens to be the original source of both testosterone and hormones used in birth control pills were also derived from Mexican yam, from steroids in Mexican yams. But in any case, DHA was removed from the market in the late 80s because of quality control problems. And then they passed a law in 1994 called the Dietary Supplements Act, and it allowed, there was passages in there which basically allowed supplements like DHA to come back on the market. And, DHA was back on the market, but DHA always proved a little problematic as far as boosting testosterone in the sense that, to make a long story short, it worked better for women. In other words, it kind of always boosts testosterone in women, but in men it tends to take two divergent directions which aren't very favorable. In one direction it becomes a metabolite of what they call dehydrotestosterone, which is sometimes called the bad boy testosterone because it's the cause of acne, male pattern baldness, and prostate problems. And the other pathway it could take is estrogen, which is also, excess estrogen in men is also problematic. So a couple of years, I think it was in the late 90s, there was a chemist named Pat Arnold, and he went to he was familiar with steroid metabolism, and he came out with an alternative to DHA, which he said was a far more direct pathway to testosterone. It was called androstenedione. And androstenedione is also made in the body, which allowed it to be sold based on the 1994 Supplement Act. It's found in certain foods also. And when under those conditions, it can be produced as a commercial supplement. It was also, this particular, let's say, adrenal steroid, androstenedione, was actually used as a nasal spray by East German athletes in the 70s, in the Olympics.
Wow.
Because it actually was known to, they didn't use it to increase muscle size. They used it because when you snorted this stuff, it increased aggression very rapidly, and that's what they wanted in sports, see? And, Pat Arnold found this research also, and he basically came out with I guess you would call it the first real pro-hormone, was androstenedione, and it gained some fame. I think it was 1998 when they were having that home run derby between Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa. It turns out that McGwire admitted using this androstenedione, and that's when it really became famous. Subsequent research, unfortunately, showed that it also, in men, tended to take an estrogen pathway rather than testosterone, so it really wasn't a very good pro-hormone. And over the years, these various companies have devised various so-called testosterone boosters, or what they call pro-hormones. And it kind of peaked around, I'd say, around 2003. I call it the third generation, because what they did is kind of interesting. There's a book that's been around. It was published in the late 60s. It's basically all it is a compilation of all the anabolic steroids that were developed in the late 50s and early 60s, and there's literally thousands of them that were developed by various pharmaceutical companies, but most of them were never actually delivered to the market for various reasons, usually related to excess toxicity. In other words, they developed these things and they tested them on animals or whatever, and they found, for example, it caused liver problems, who knows, heart problems. So, but this guy named Vita, he compiled them all, their structures, into this book, and people like Pat Arnold and these other companies, they got a hold of this book, and to them it was a gold mine because it gave them the actual structures of these kind of unreleased steroids. So what some of these companies did is actually reintroduce, they kind of resurrected these dead steroids, and they put them in supplemental form, and they called them pro-hormones. And now, as I've written in my articles, it's kind of pathetic because the problem is, I mean, you know how greedy, everyone knows how greedy pharmaceutical companies are.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, if they didn't want to release them, that tells you something about these drugs. They were very toxic, and it turns out they put this stuff on the market, and a lot of people became sick. They had severe liver problems. One or two guys got prostate cancer, I remember. And, they all came to a peak when, and the government actually amended the anabolic steroid law of 1990. They passed an amendment in 2005 that basically banned all of these so-called pro-hormones, which actually were nothing more than real anabolic steroid drugs.
Yeah.
Now, the bad part is that they were very toxic, but the good part is that they really worked. In other words, when you took this stuff, if you were, let's say, a bodybuilder, you went to the gym and you actually got stronger, and in some cases you actually got larger muscles. And of course, this was great for resale. I mean, Nothing sells a supplement better than results. So this made the supplement companies purveying this stuff very happy. But then they passed that law in 2005, and what they did is they issued a list, basically listing all of these pro-hormones that were on the market. But they had a clause in there that said that any future supplement, because they knew that, a couple of the guys figured out that they knew that there were so many of these various, let's say, dead steroids floating around, they knew that somebody in the future would dig out another one and come up with it and put it on the market. So they put a clause in the law saying that any future supplement that has the capability of converting directly into testosterone is illegal. But the interesting thing is, since that time, there's been actually, I wouldn't say rampant, but there's been quite a few companies that have completely ignored that law, and they're still digging out these dead steroids, and they're putting it on the market. And every so often in the medical journals, I come across case studies of bodybuilders who've had, usually it's severe liver problems when they take this stuff. Stuff is very toxic. The interesting thing is, it's kind of pathetic because a lot of people will take these supplements and they figure because it's over the counter, it doesn't require a prescription, it's safe.
Right.
But if you say to them, well, why don't you just take anabolic steroids, get a prescription, and they say, no, I don't want to take those drugs. But yet they don't hesitate. They don't realize they're taking anabolic steroid discarded drugs that are worse than the drugs that come with a prescription.
Mm-hmm.
The ones that come with a prescription, side effects are relatively rare if you use them right. But with these pro-hormones, it's almost guaranteed you're going to get some side effects.
Well, I want to take this opportunity to mention your ebook, Natural Anabolics, Nutrition Compounds and Supplements that you can accelerate muscle growth without drugs. So that can be found on jerrybrainum.com?
Correct. Yeah, that book basically goes into various sports supplements, and it gives you a couple of ideas of ways of boosting testosterone that are safe, that don't involve any toxicity, or any harm to your liver. And naturally, as you could probably tell, I'm not really a big fan of the so-called testosterone supplements on the market. And again, to answer the question you asked me earlier directly, without the detail, I would say that there's no testosterone, with maybe one or two exceptions, there's no testosterone booster on the market that actually works. A lot of them, if you go online and look in the forums, you'll see these people raving about how they're making gains and getting stronger, these bodybuilders supposedly. But a lot of these people who leave these messages are shills. In other words, they either are associated with the company or they work with companies selling this stuff, or the other option is that it's a placebo effect, meaning that, and this holds true for, unfortunately, a lot of supplements, meaning that if you think a supplement's going to work, you're going to subconsciously do things like train harder and do things like that, which will translate into real gains, and you're going to attribute it to the supplement when, in fact, the supplement might have done absolutely nothing.
Exactly.
Absolutely nothing. But because you believe it, it's a very powerful effect, and I've seen it dozens and dozens of times. It's real, and it's involved in a lot of the supplements on the market. They produce their effects through the placebo effect. Placebo literally means I will believe.
Mm-hmm.
That explains it all.
Yeah, absolutely. It tells it all.
Yeah.
Jerry, we just have a couple minutes left, and I want to ask you one more question. Now, there's a lot of nutrition experts or so-called experts that you have interviewed. Are there any that have made a positive impression?
The truth is, unfortunately, a lot of these people, particularly the people with advanced degrees, like PhDs, and a couple of the people with, unfortunately, the dietitians, they kind of put themselves on a pedestal and they look down on people who don't, let's say, have their advanced degrees. To make it a long story short, a lot of these people are know-it-alls, and I found that a lot of them are sadly lacking in total nutritional knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Over the years, I failed to be impressed by most of them. I consider a lot of them just basically blowhards who are just out, they're sneaky guys. They're under contract to supplement companies. They lie to people. One guy who I interviewed about a year or two ago who did impress me with his knowledge is a guy named Anthony Almeida. Anthony has a product. It's called Gen R8, and I'm not trying to push his product, but it's basically a carbohydrate supplement that's research-based. Anthony Almeida was the co-founder of the EAS Nutrition Company, which is actually pretty well known. Later sold it to a guy named Bill Phillips. But Anthony has a degree from the University of Berkeley, but I've consistently been impressed by his breadth of his knowledge. So he's one of the few guys. A couple of people that I used to be impressed with, I've now kind of more or less cast off because I found them to be phonies, and they've slipped into commercialism to the point where they actually lie to people. So I won't even mention their names. One of them was a medical doctor in Canada that really, really turned out to be a big letdown. I used to be impressed by him, but now I'm not at all. But I won't mention his name. I'm not out to hurt anybody, but just to answer the question. So, again, to the short version is that most of the so-called nutrition experts out there don't impress me one iota, not one bit.
Now you are known for telling it like it is. You're not behind any product. You're not pushing any product. You will tell it like it is. So I think there are a lot of people out there that appreciate you and appreciate your articles in Iron Man and on your blog. So can you tell us how to get? You have 2 blog sites. Can you tell us how to get there? Right.
Well, one of them is a kind of a personal blog that I write. It's called Applied Ergogenics. And the address of it is Applied Ergogenics. That's one word, appliedergogenics.blogspot.com. And I update it about maybe once or twice a week, sometimes 3, depending on what I come across. And I try to keep it different from other blogs. I try to find some really unique stuff related to nutrition and exercise that I think would be of interest. And I always give the practical implications of the research. In other words, what does this study mean to you? Mm-hmm. I think people get derive a lot of benefit. I have a similar blog at Ironman Magazine on the Ironman Magazine site, and that you could reach that one at ironmanmagazine.com/blogs/Jerry Brainum, one word. And that also I include a lot of interesting information. In fact, later, maybe today or tomorrow, on the Applied Ergogenics, I'm going to be writing some brand new research about amino acid that's popular among bodybuilders called glutamine. They've come across I came across a really interesting new study that hasn't even been published yet, relating to how glutamine helps prevent muscle loss. See, this is an example of what I was saying earlier, because a lot of these so-called nutrition gurus, I've seen their writing where they talk about how glutamine is garbage. They actually say it's useless. And I completely disagree. I mean, for bodybuilding purposes. Mm-hmm. I completely disagree because apparently they don't look at the research I do. Because if they did, they'd see that glutamine has some effects that aren't well known, but could be actually very useful for those engaged in weight training.
Well, I want to encourage everyone to check out those blogs, and I've read the one at Iron Man Magazine, and I look forward to reading your other articles on your other blog sites. So, Jerry Brainum, I want to thank you very much for joining us. It was great to talk to you again, man. I look forward to it again in the future. We'll have to do this more often. Thanks again. So it's time for us to close and say goodbye. Thanks, Jerry.
Okay, bye-bye, Sherry.